Rain patters steadily outside the window frame. Wind blows through the cracks of decaying wooden boards, creating a sound like someone sighing. In the distance, church bells echo 3 times, then fall silent. When the sun sets and the streets sink into darkness, there is one place that remains awake. Not the living, but the dead. That place is the library. Those old libraries, built of gray granite and stained glass windows, where knowledge sleeps alongside secrets that are never told. But did you know? There are books that are never opened. There are hallways that should never be walked after midnight. And there are souls that never leave the bookshelves. Sit down here, close to the warm fire, if you dare. I will tell you 5 ghost stories set in 5 real libraries in America. Places where light cannot chase away the darkness, and silence hides the screams for help. The pendulum clock has just struck 11 p.m. Close your eyes if you are afraid. But even if you hide, these stories will still find you. Heavy rain falls on the tin roof of the Willard Library. Thunder rumbles in the distance like the footsteps of a giant walking across the sky. An old wooden door suddenly creaks, even though no one opened it. The Willard Library was built in 1885. The gray limestone building has towering columns and arched windows, but that antique beauty conceals a dark secret. For over 100 years, it has been known as the most haunted library in Indiana, not because of a cursed book, but because of a woman who never leaves. Can you hear it? The sound of silk dragging across the stone floor, very soft, very far away, as if someone is walking through the empty hallways. Her name was Louise Carpenter, daughter of the city's richest donor. She loved this library more than anyone. She spent her youth arranging books, dusting shelves, and secretly loving a man who never loved her back. When her father died in 1883, everything collapsed. The will did not mention her name. All the fortune went to her older brother, a man who had never set foot in the library even once. Louise screamed in the main reading room. Her cries shattered among the towering bookshelves. She smashed 2 oil lamps, oil spilling onto the floor and reeking. Then she ran out into the rain and never returned alive. Her body was found by the Ohio River. She was wearing her gray dress, gray veil, and her eyes were wide open, staring straight at the sky. River water lapped gently at her feet, as if trying to pull her down one more time, but her soul came back. One stormy night, just like tonight, a young librarian named Rachel volunteered to stay late. She wanted to reorganize the rare books section on the 3rd floor, the area no one dared enter after 8 p.m. Rachel told herself, "They're just old books, nothing to be afraid of." The sound of her leather shoes echoed on the wooden floor, each step making a dry crack like breaking a rotten branch. She started with the first shelf, dusting rag in hand. Then she heard crying. Not a child's cry, not an adult's either. It was sobbing that came from a throat that had been dry for a very long time. Each hiccup broke out, then fell silent, then broke out again. Rachel stood frozen. She picked up her flashlight. The beam swept across every shelf, every wall, every window. No one was there. But the crying continued, this time clearer and closer. Then she heard footsteps, very slow, as if someone was walking from the far end of the hallway toward her. Each step stretched into eternity. Rachel should have run, but her feet would not move, as if an invisible hand had nailed her to the floor. She turned her head slowly and saw a tall woman in a long gray dress that swept the floor, a gray shawl covering her shoulders, and a gray veil. She stood by the last bookshelf, her back to Rachel. Rachel whispered, lips trembling, "Who are you? The library is closed." The woman did not answer. She slowly turned around, the sound of her neck bones cracking like splintering wood. When she fully faced Rachel, Rachel saw that under the veil there was no face. Only a patch of darkness and two eyes, two cold glowing dots like stones at the bottom of a well. She took a step. Each footstep made no sound, but Rachel could feel the floor vibrate faintly, like the heartbeat of a dead person. Rachel screamed and lunged toward the stairs. Her shoes slipped on the damp wood. She nearly fell. Behind her, the sound of silk dragging grew faster. She ran down to the second floor, through the main reading room, to the hallway leading to the front door, but the heavy steel door had already slammed shut. Rachel pounded her fists against it, the sound ringing out like pounding on a tomb. No one heard. Then the reading room door behind her swung open. No wind, no one there, just darkness. And inside that darkness, the gray shape. The woman stood at the threshold, her feet not touching the floor, hovering an inch above the ground. Her veil fluttered, though there was no wind. Her voice did not come from her mouth, but from everywhere in the room. "This is mine. All of this is mine." Rachel curled up at the foot of the steel door, closed her eyes, prayed, and wept. Then everything fell silent. The next morning, colleagues found Rachel unconscious among the rare books. Her hair had turned completely white. Her eyes were wide open, filled with terror. She never returned to the library. She quit her job, left the city. And on the rare occasions when someone asked about that night, Rachel would repeat only one sentence, in a voice hoarse, as if her throat had been crushed. She doesn't want the books. She wants the souls of the living. And if you go to Willard Library on a rainy night and listen very closely, you will hear the sound of silk dragging, and you might be the next one. Imagine standing in the middle of the Wyoming desert. No trees, no houses, only wind, sand, and a pitch-black sky. And in the middle of that solitude stands a building, the Sweetwater County Library. On the outside, it is peaceful, but beneath its foundation lies something you never want to see. Because this library was built on top of an old cemetery from the pioneer era, where the poor, prisoners, and the forgotten were buried. In 1980, construction workers dug the foundation and found bones, dozens of skeletons stacked on top of each other like spoons in a drawer. They reported it to the authorities, but the project was too far along, too expensive. They moved only part of them and poured concrete over the rest, and the dead were never allowed to rest. James was the night security guard, a burly man who had served in the military. He did not believe in ghosts, did not believe in anything he could not see or punch. James often said, "Strange noises are just mice. Bad smells are clogged pipes. A white shadow gliding by is just light reflecting off a window." But everything changed one November night. It wasn't raining, but it was bone cold. The temperature dropped below freezing. James's breath turned into white wisps rising to the ceiling. He started his shift at 10 p.m., checked the first floor, the second floor, the third floor. Nothing unusual. Then he went down to the basement, where the oldest books were stored, and where no one went after 11 p.m. At exactly 1 a.m., James's watch alarm went off. He was about to go up to the ground floor to make coffee when he heard music. Not music from his radio, nor from someone's earphones. It was an old funeral dirge, like from a 19th century phonograph, a woman's voice, high and piercing but shattered, like singing from under a grave. James walked toward the newspaper area. The door had been locked for 3 years, ever since the local paper ceased operations, but now it stood wide open. James poked his head in. In the pitch-dark room, an old radio on a wooden table was playing, not plugged in. The power cord had been cut long ago, still playing, that funeral song. James stepped closer, intending to turn it off. But when his fingers touched the dial, the music stopped abruptly, and instead, a stench filled the air. The stench of rotting corpses, of decaying flesh, of damp bones, of dug-up grave soil. That smell rose from the concrete floor as if something was crawling up. James backed away and ran toward the stairs, but as he put his foot on the first step, he heard knocking from under the floor, from beneath the concrete. Tap, tap. 3 steady taps, like someone knocking on a coffin from the inside. James ran faster. Second step, third step. Then, on the 5th step, a hand reached up from below. Not a living hand. It was a rotting hand, skin peeling, white bone showing, fingernails long and jagged. It grabbed James's ankle, cold as ice, cold as death itself. James lunged upward, kicked hard. The hand shattered, but the fingers still clung. He dragged himself, carrying that rotten hand, up to the ground floor, gasping. He looked down. The hand had vanished. Only 5 dark bruises remained on his ankle, shaped like 5 fingers. James was about to call for help on his phone when he heard from the basement the sound of hundreds of footsteps at once, as if all the dead beneath the foundation had risen and were climbing up. The basement door burst open, and they appeared. Dozens of shadows, men, women, children. They wore 19th century clothes, torn dresses, threadbare coats, holy shoes. But their eyes were all the same, pitch black, no pupils, no color, only infinite darkness. In unison they spoke, their voices raspy, like sand flowing through broken teeth. "Give us back our bones." James passed out, collapsing on the floor of the main reading room. The dark figures stood around him, staring down in silence until dawn. The next morning, staff found James curled up like a child. All over his body, arms, legs, back, hundreds of bruise marks in the shape of hands, as if he had been embraced by an entire cemetery. James resigned that same morning and moved to another state, but the bruises never went away. After this incident, the Sweetwater County Library began recording all strange phenomena. They bought a thick black notebook and called it the Ghost Book. The first page was James's account. The second, a librarian who saw a figure sitting on a shelf. The third, a student who heard her name called from the basement. That notebook grows thicker every year, and if you ever visit that library, do not ask to see it, because anyone who reads it at night will hear knocking from beneath their feet. The building of the Osterhout Library was not always a library. Before, it was an old church built on land that had been a battlefield during the American Revolution. They say that under 3 layers of brick and 2 layers of granite, bullets still remain, and the souls of soldiers who died on that very spot have never left. One of them is an unknown martyr. People often see his dark figure gliding through the long hallway at night, a tall shadow in a torn uniform, headless. But the most terrifying spirit is not the soldier. It is the librarian. No one knows his name, only that he worked here from the 1920s until his sudden death in 1947, a heart attack that struck just as he was chasing a group of noisy students out of the reading room. He was buried in the cemetery across the street, but his soul returned to the library that same night. Security guards say they still hear his footsteps, creak, creak, on the second-floor hallway after 10 p.m. The jangling of keys, though no one holds them, and sometimes a loud shh from behind a bookshelf when someone speaks too loudly. But there is one place he guards more fiercely than silence: the secret door. Lily was a history student, 22 years old, ambitious, and did not believe in ghosts. She came to the Osterhout Library to research local battles and asked the head librarian for permission to stay after closing. The head librarian looked at her, shook her head, and said, "You should not stay past 9 p.m. There are things not meant for the living." Lily laughed. She thought the old woman just wanted to go home early. She stayed. Around 8 p.m., darkness began to fall. Lily sat in the silent reading room under the yellow glow of a desk lamp, reading a handwritten war diary in brown ink, when she heard the rustle of pages being turned, swish, 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 from the hallway. Lily thought someone else was also staying late. She stood up, opened the reading room door, and stepped into the hallway. No one was there. The hallway stretched long and dark. At the far end stood a wooden door Lily had never seen before. She knew every nook of this library. She had been here hundreds of times. That door had never existed. Lily walked closer. The brass doorknob was covered in greenish dust. She turned it. The door opened without a sound. Inside was a spiral stone staircase leading deep underground. The smell of mildew and the smell of fresh blood rose from below. Lily could have turned back, closed the door, and left. But curiosity killed the cat, and tonight it would kill Lily. She stepped onto the first step. The stone was freezing cold, penetrating her shoe soles. Second step, third step. The deeper she went, the thicker the air became, as if someone was breathing with her. Finally, she reached an underground chamber. On the walls, lines of Latin script glowed a faint green, like the ink of dead fireflies. In the center of the room stood a stone table, and on the table an open book. Lily walked over and bent down to look. It was not printed text. It was handwriting in blood, and the blood was still wet. She stepped back, and then the door above slammed shut. The sound reverberated underground like thunder inside a coffin. Then an old, hoarse voice came from the wall behind her. "You are not allowed in here." Lily turned. A figure was slowly emerging from the stone wall. He was old, very old, his face wrinkled like a dried apple, his eyes white and pupilless. He wore an old vest coated in grave dust, and in his hand a bunch of iron keys covered in rust. Each key jingled, though he did not move. He took a step. Each footstep left a dent in the stone floor, as if he weighed as much as the entire building. Lily bolted up the stairs, climbing faster than she ever had. Behind her, the jingling keys grew closer. 10th step, 15th, 20th. A book flew out of nowhere and slammed into her head with a sharp pain. A second book, a third, a fourth. They flew at her one after another, as if an invisible hand was throwing them with the fury of a madman. Lily burst out through the doorway, slammed it shut, and saw the old librarian standing at the last step, looking up. Those white, empty eyes suddenly turned black, and he smiled. Lily ran to the front door, pounding on the glass until a security guard came to unlock it. She fled into the cold rain, gasping, and looked back at the building. The secret door The spiral staircase, the underground chamber, all had vanished. Only a smooth brick wall remained, as if they had never existed. Lily never returned to the Osterhout Library. She switched her major to economics, but one thing haunted her for the rest of her life. Every time she entered any library, she would hear the jingling of iron keys, far away or very close. And some nights, she would wake at 2 a.m. with an old book lying on her chest. No label, no author's name, only a line on the last page. There is one more door for you. Danvers. Today, it is a peaceful town with old houses and clean sidewalks. But 300 years ago, it had another name, Salem Village, the site of the most notorious witch hunt in American history. The accused women were hanged, crushed under stones, burned alive, and their burial place was not a cemetery, but wasteland at the edge of the woods under old oak trees. One of those spots lies directly beneath the Peabody Institute Library. Daniel was a literary researcher, 32 years old, solitary, and obsessed with witch stories. He believed that the 1,692 trials were not mass hysteria, but the truth. He came to the Peabody Institute Library to find evidence. An elderly librarian named Martha handed Daniel a book. Not an ordinary book. The cover was bound in leather, but not cow or sheep leather, human skin. Daniel shuddered when he touched it. Martha said, "This diary was found in the basement in 1971. It belonged to a woman executed for witchcraft. Her name was Agatha." Daniel asked, "What did she write with?" Martha looked straight into his eyes, with her own blood before she was burned. That night, Daniel stayed in the library. He brought a desk lamp, a notebook, and a tape recorder. He sat in the most secluded corner on the 3rd floor, a place without windows. Just him, the diary, and silence. He opened the first page. The blood had turned dark brown, but was still readable. The letters were crooked, as if written by a trembling hand. Daniel read silently. The 3rd day of September. They came at dawn. They said, "I bewitched a doll. I have never seen that doll, but they do not believe." He turned to the 2nd page. "They locked me in a dark cellar. I hear rats gnawing bones, but not rat bones. The bones of the one before me." Daniel began to feel cold. He glanced at the thermometer, 21 degrees Celsius, but he could see his own breath turning into white mist. He turned further. On the 5th page, the writing began to change. It was no longer Agatha's handwriting, but Daniel's own. He had never written those lines, yet they were appearing, letter by letter, as if an invisible hand was writing. Daniel read aloud. "Daniel will die at midnight. His heart will stop, and his soul will remain here forever." He threw the book onto the table. The book fell open, and from between the pages, a dark, blackish cord emerged. It was not rope, nor a snake. It was an umbilical cord, still wet with blood, still smelling of a fetus that had rotted for 300 years. The cord crawled out of the book, slithered across the table, then climbed up Daniel's arm. It wrapped around his wrist and tightened. Daniel screamed. He tried to pull away, but the cord only squeezed harder. Blood from his wrist dripped onto the cord, and the cord drank it like an unborn child nursing at its mother. The desk lamp went out. The room plunged into darkness, and in that darkness, a woman's black shadow appeared. She was tall, thin, hair long and gray. Her face was deformed, eyes bulging, mouth sewn shut with black thread. From the stitches, Blood still oozed slowly. She did not walk. She glided to Daniel's side, raised a skeletal hand with fingers twice as long as a normal person's. She opened her mouth. The threads snapped one by one. Her mouth stretched wide enough to fit a human head, and from inside that mouth came a voice that was not a woman's, but the voice of hundreds of souls in unison. You have read the curse. Now you belong to me. The umbilical cord tightened around Daniel's throat. He could not breathe. His eyes began to turn white. His head swam, and he saw strange images. A great fire, a woman tied to a stake, screams, the smell of burning flesh. With a final shred of hope, Daniel reached for the table, grabbed a pencil, and stabbed it into the diary. The sound of the pencil piercing human skin, a dry thump, and the entire room flashed white. The light did not come from a lamp. It was light from another world. A shriek, like 1,000 bats, rang out for an instant, then died. Daniel opened his eyes. The umbilical cord was gone. The black woman was gone. On the table, the diary was burning with blue, smokeless flames, consuming page after page until only a pile of ash remained. That ash was shaped like a hand. 5 fingers spread wide, as if waiting for someone to take hold. Daniel ran out of the library and never returned. But on his arm, where the cord had wrapped, a black mark remained. And for a whole month, tiny letters appeared on that mark, then faded, then reappeared. The last line before his skin healed completely read, "You will come back." Daniel moved, changed his name, gave away all his books. But every night he dreamed the same dream. A dark cellar door, the sound of someone writing inside. And when he stepped in, a pen wrote by itself on blank paper, "Long time no see, Daniel. A." There is an underground river that flows beneath Rochester. No one knows where it begins, no one knows where it ends. Only that sometimes, on calm, windless nights, people hear the sound of water running from the sewers. The Rochester Central Library was built directly above a branch of that underground river. In 1880, a young girl named Elsie, only 19 years old, fell into a storm drain while walking in the rain. The water swept her away. Her body was found 3 days later, trapped in a tunnel directly beneath the library's foundation. She was still wearing her white dress, her hair still braided, her eyes wide open, her mouth agape, as if she had been calling someone's name in her final moment. She was buried in the cemetery across the river, but her soul never left the library. Mark was a failed writer. He was 35, had never published a book, and had just been left by his wife. He came to Rochester seeking solitude. He thought that if he could not write a great novel, at least he could die in a beautiful place. The Rochester Library, with its stained glass windows and smell of old paper, was where he chose to end things. Mark often stayed after closing. He asked the head librarian for permission, saying he needed quiet to write. The head librarian looked at him with pity and said, "You shouldn't sit in that corner on the 3rd floor. It's very cold there, and someone doesn't like strangers." Mark smiled. He thought the old woman just wanted him to leave early. He chose the 3rd floor corner, a small wooden table against the wall, directly above the sewer area. The first night, everything was quiet. The second night, he heard water running from under the floor. Not the sound of pipes. It was water flowing upward, as if someone was swimming against the current. Mark put down his pen, bent over, and pressed his ear to the wooden floor. The water sound grew clearer, and within it, a voice singing. A young woman's voice, clear but cold, as if singing in a cavern at the bottom of the ocean. Mark gathered his courage, leaned down to the gap in the floorboards, and looked through. And he saw a pale white face looking back at him from below, less than half a meter away, separated only by a rotting plank of wood. The girl's eyes were black as bottomless pits. No iris, no light, only infinite darkness. Her mouth was open, lips gray, and from her mouth water flowed, black, foul water flowing upward through the crack, soaking the back of Mark's hand. Mark jerked back. His chair tipped over. He fell to the floor and saw from the crack white fingers pushing up. One finger, two fingers, then a whole hand. Elsie's hand crawled out of the floor like a giant centipede, followed by her arm, then her face again. But this time, her entire body was emerging through the floorboards, as if through the surface of water. Mark lunged for the door, but the door was locked. Not locked with a bolt, but locked by an invisible force, as if the door had never intended to open. He turned around. Elsie was standing. Her white dress, sopping wet, clung to her thin frame. Her matted hair hung over her shoulders. Black water from her dress flowed onto the floor, forming a puddle that grew and grew. She walked toward Mark. Each step left a dark footprint and a squelching sound. Schlep, schlep, schlep. She reached him, raised her hand, and gently touched his cheek. Her hand was cold as a corpse that had been in the river for 3 days, but it was not ordinary cold. It was the cold of loneliness, of longing, of a soul that had waited 140 years to touch a living person. Elsie whispered, her voice like water trickling through cracked stone. Die with me, here. No one is alone anymore. She took Mark's notebook and scribbled with her finger. No pen needed. Blood and water mixed into reddish-black crooked letters. I have waited for you for 140 years. Don't leave me alone again. Mark tried to scream, but Elsie placed her finger on his lips. The finger was so cold that his lips went numb. He could not open his mouth. She bent down, put her ear to his chest, as if listening to his heartbeat. Then she looked up, smiled the smile of a 19-year-old girl, long dead, and said, Your heartbeat is so beautiful. I want to keep it. She placed her hand on his chest. Mark felt his heart being squeezed. An invisible hand was squeezing slowly, slowly, like juicing a lemon. Mark collapsed to the floor, eyes staring at the ceiling. On the ceiling, the black water stains from Elsie's dress spread into a circle like a bottomless well. And from that circle, Mark saw himself falling into the underground river, falling with Elsie, falling forever. The next morning, library staff found Mark unconscious in a puddle of foul black water. His fingers had clawed the floorboards bloody, mixing with the water. Beside him, his notebook lay open to the last page. On the white paper, a small handprint and a line of text. You promised to stay. I will wait, even if I have to wait another 140 years. Mark survived, but he could no longer speak. Doctors said it was psychological trauma, but Mark knew his tongue was not damaged. It had only been frozen by the cold of Elsie's touch. Every night in the psychiatric hospital, Mark tapped rhythms on the wall. 3 long taps, 2 short taps, over and over. The nurses thought it was a nervous tick, but it was actually a distress signal, or perhaps a call back to the library. No one knows. All that is known is that on rainy nights, when Rochester sinks into darkness, people still hear singing from the sewers. And late-night walkers swear they see through the 3rd-floor window of the library a white figure embracing a dark figure, swaying gently as if they were dancing a waltz under the cold moonlight. 5 stories, 5 libraries, 5 deaths that never truly end. Louise Carpenter still wears her gray dress, wandering among the bookshelves. The skeletons under Sweetwater County still knock from beneath the foundation. The old librarian still shushes noisy patrons with his jangling iron keys. Agatha still writes curses in blood from her human skin diary. And Elsie, that 19-year-old girl, still waits under the underground river for a lover who never comes. If you ever visit those libraries, go during the day, smile at the librarian, borrow a book, and leave before dark. Because when night falls and the clock strikes 11, doors you have never seen will begin to open, and there are guests who never return their books because they keep the borrower as well. I have finished telling the 5 stories. The candle has gone out. The clock has just struck midnight, and I hear behind me the sound of a book falling from a shelf. I will not turn around to pick it up. What about you? Would you dare